speakers today. Michael, good to see you again after many years. This hearing comes at such a critical time for the Syrian people and to thousands of Syrian Americans living in Pennsylvania in the Lehigh Valley. I share your joy at the fall of the butcher of Syria. But even with Assad gone, significant challenges, to state the obvious, remain. And as we've discussed today, the new interim president in Damascus and many of his advisors are U.S. designated terrorists with longstanding links to al-Qaeda. We do not yet know whether this transition process underway will lead to a government that will protect all Syrians. And this process will matter a great deal, of course, to Israel's security and to America's security. So, Mr. Singh, I'd like to start with you on the topic of counterterrorism. From the truck attack in New Orleans to the 2016 shooting of a Philadelphia police officer, Jess Harnett, our nation has seen firsthand how terrorist groups like ISIS can use Syria as a safe haven and inspire acts of violence in the United States. How concerned are you about the enduring presence of ISIS in Syria, and what would take, and we've talked about some of this already, but what would take, if you were going to do the couple key points, from Syria reemerging as a sanctuary for global terrorist groups?
Well, thanks a lot, Senator McCormick. It's great to see you up there. Look, I think one thing we can take away from not just the Syria situation, but the past 18 months of war in the Middle East is, as much as we may want to move on to other issues and other challenges, terrorism remains a top threat to U.S. national security, to the security of our allies, and we have to take it seriously. We can't afford to sort of ease up on the pressure on groups like al-Qaeda and ISIS, which remain active and determined to attack us around the world. We've talked in this hearing about the break between HTS and some of these groups, and one of the reasons they broke apart was over this question of attacks globally against the West, where ISIS and al-Qaeda are determined to keep doing that. And those groups are active every day in Syria. And it's through the joint efforts of a lot of different actors who we've mentioned here today. The United States, for sure, also our local partners like the SDF, also other forces in northern and southern Syria that prevent those actors from mounting terrorist attacks. I would say that it wouldn't take a lot. If you have the opportunity, because you have the absence of legitimate governing or security forces, if you have a thriving radical ideology and a system that's kind of nurturing that, because, Senator, you've served in war zones, that ideological piece is in a way just as important, if not more so, than the actual weapons and plots. If you have those pieces, you could absolutely have a resurgence of ISIS, and they could absolutely direct attacks against the United States. We have to be vigilant against that.
Thank you. And Ms. Stroll, two quick questions that I hope you can respond to. The first is, we talked a little bit, Michael, you talked about this a bit, of the phasing out of sanctions based on the performance of the new government. And if you're going to think about the sequencing of that, what would be sort of the first milestone, and what would be the first set of sanctions that you would consider withdrawing? Second topic is repatriation of refugees. My wife and I and my kids had the chance a couple years ago to work in the camps in Jordan, where there's millions, as you know, millions of Syrian refugees that have been there for years, and also have put a huge burden on the Jordanian government and economy. Is there any talk of repatriation? Has any of that started to happen? What's been the posture of the new government on that topic?
Thank you, Senator, for those questions. With respect to sanctions, the most significant sanctions are these state-level sanctions. The state sponsor of terrorism designation on the Syrian central government, and then the Caesar sanctions. Those are, when you lift the state sponsor of terrorism, it's a one-time shot. So my recommendation would be to work on successive expansions of the waivers and exemptions to facilitate stabilization and to facilitate allies, partners, and financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank who will not want to run afoul of U.S. law and sanctions first. But because this is about terrorism, we need to test them on the criteria of these designations, and we're doing some of that now. There's was a Washington Post article about some operational counterterrorism intelligence that the U.S. military has provided to the al-Shara government to go after ISIS cells. We should continue to test that premise.
And the Hezbollah transition, too, you talked about, which is important, yeah.
I think they're doing the right thing, and we should test when operationally relevant, what information we can provide to them to go after threats that threaten Syria, threaten our neighbors and partners in the region, and threaten our national security. And with respect to refugees, President al-Shara has made very clear that he would like Syrians to be able to return to their home, and we know that a lot of these refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, and Iraq and Turkey would want to come home, and a lot of them are already testing the premise. So they're coming in for short periods of time to see what is happening in their homes. Some of them are flying home from Europe, but they're going to need to be assured that if they're really going to go repatriate, that there's going to be services, the rubble is going to be cleared, Syrian currency is not going to crash, there will be jobs, there will be food, and this again comes back to the kinds of engagement that we can facilitate in order to address those underlying drivers of conflict.
Very good, thank you.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen, and thank both of you